My daughter-in-law didn't know I'd been studying Mandarin for the past 7 months. When I heard what she said about me to her mother on that Sunday afternoon, in my own kitchen while I was standing right there, I understood, finally, why my late husband had never trusted her. I'm Claudette Marsh. I'm 63 years old, and I want to tell you something that took me 2 years of being treated like a piece of furniture to finally understand. Some people will only see you the way you allow them to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband, Robert, died 26 months ago from pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. 11 weeks. I've measured the last 2 years in those weeks, somehow. 11 weeks was all we got from something is wrong to he's gone. We've been married for 38 years. He was a quiet man, a civil engineer who loved woodworking and terrible puns and black coffee at 5 in the morning. He used to bring me a cup even though I always told him I didn't want one. I always drank it anyway. I still make 2 cups every morning. I don't know when I'll stop. After Robert died, I had to figure out what I was. I'd been a labor and delivery nurse for 32 years before I retired. I'd held hundreds of newborns in my hands. I knew how to be useful, how to stay calm when everything was going sideways, how to read a room. What I did not know how to do was be alone. My son, Thomas, lives 40 minutes away in Glastonbury, Connecticut, with his wife, Ivy, and their 3-year-old daughter, Sophie. Thomas is a software architect at a financial services company. He's good at his job. He's also, bless his heart, the kind of man who genuinely believes that if nobody is fighting, everything is fine. Ivy is 34. She's sharp, polished, the kind of woman who has a color-coded pantry and sends thank you notes within 48 hours of receiving a gift. She works in international business development, which means she travels a lot, speaks 3 languages fluently, English, Mandarin, and French, and has opinions about everything, including how I should be spending my retirement years. When Robert first got sick, Ivy was attentive. She drove me to appointments. She brought food. She called to check in. I was grateful. I thought, Robert worried about nothing. She's a good person. She loves my son. Then Robert died, and after a few months, something shifted. I can't point to one moment. It was more like a slow dimming. The calls got shorter. The invitations got fewer. When I did come to Sunday dinners, there were these micro-expressions. A slight tightening around Ivy's eyes when I walked in. A pause before she said, "Oh, Claudette, hi." That was just a beat too long. Small things. The kind of things that, if you mention them to anyone, would make you sound paranoid. Thomas noticed nothing. Or if he did, he filed it under women's dynamics and left it alone. He loves us both. He didn't want to choose. I understood that. I still understand it. I started going less. I told myself I was giving them space. The truth is, I was tired of feeling like a guest in my son's home. The Mandarin started because of Sophie. Ivy's mother, Connie, lives in Flushing, Queens, and speaks primarily Mandarin. She visits often. When she's there, she and Ivy speak to each other in Mandarin constantly, which is completely natural and fine. What wasn't fine, or what started to feel not fine, was that Sophie was picking up Mandarin phrases faster than she was picking up words from me. I'm her grandmother. I read to her every time I see her. I sing to her. And she was looking to Connie for language in a way she wasn't looking to me, because Connie had a whole world that felt alive and warm and specific, and I was just grandma who showed up with picture books in a language Sophie already had covered. I'm not saying that was Ivy's fault. It wasn't. But it made me feel something I didn't want to feel, replaceable. One evening in March, I was watching a documentary and there was a segment about American seniors taking language classes as a form of cognitive engagement, and they mentioned Mandarin specifically, how the tonal nature of it keeps your brain working in ways English doesn't. I thought, fine, what do I have to lose? I found a class at the West Hartford Public Library. Wednesday mornings, 10 o'clock. The instructor was a woman named Janet who'd married a man from Chengdu 20 years ago and raised their kids bilingual. She was patient and funny, and she had a theory that adults learn languages better than children in one specific way. We understand why it matters. Children absorb, adults decide. There's a different kind of commitment in that. I decided. I took the library class for 8 weeks, and then I kept going. I downloaded an app. I found a conversation group that met at a community center in West Hartford on Thursday evenings. I watched Chinese cooking shows with subtitles on and tried to catch words I knew. I bought a small notebook and wrote vocabulary in it every morning over my 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for Robert, even though he never drank it and I always did. I didn't tell Thomas. I didn't tell Ivy. It felt private. It felt like something I was doing for myself, and for Sophie, and maybe a little bit for the version of me that had spent 30 years being useful to everyone else and had forgotten she was also allowed to just want things. 7 months in, I was functional, not fluent. I couldn't discuss politics or philosophy, but I could follow a conversation. I could understand the shape of what was being said even when I missed individual words. I was good enough. I found this out in October, on a Sunday. Ivy had invited me for lunch. I should say, Ivy had texted Thomas that I should come for lunch, and Thomas had called me, and I had said yes, because Sophie had just started walking upstairs by herself and I wanted to see it. That's the truth. I wasn't going for Ivy. I was going for Sophie and her stairs. Connie was there when I arrived. I hadn't known she would be. I smiled and we exchanged the usual pleasantries, the careful bilingual hello that we'd developed over the years. She'd say something in Mandarin and I'd nod and Thomas would translate and she'd be gracious about it. That was our rhythm. Lunch was fine. Thomas talked about a project at work. Sophie showed me the stairs 4 times, up and down, very proud of herself. I held her hand on the way down and she said, "Careful, Grandma," in this tiny, serious voice that almost broke me in half with love. Connie watched us and smiled, and I thought, this is okay. This is worth the drive. After lunch, Thomas went downstairs to his office to take a work call. Sophie went down for her nap, and I was in the kitchen helping Ivy rinse dishes while Connie sat at the kitchen table. I was at the sink with my back to them. That's when it started. Connie asked Ivy something in Mandarin. I caught enough to know she was asking about me, specifically, asking if I came over often. Ivy's answer was fluid and long. I kept my eyes on the dishes and my face completely neutral. Ivy said, and I understood this clearly because I practiced the exact vocabulary of family and obligation in my Thursday conversation group, that I came over too much, that I didn't call ahead the way a normal person would, that Thomas was too soft about it. She used a phrase that translated roughly to, "She appears like weather. Just shows up, no warning, nothing you can control." Connie made a sympathetic sound. Ivy continued. She said that since Robert died, I had become, and I am going to translate this as gently as I can, a problem that Thomas refuses to solve. She said I hovered over Sophie in a way that contradicted Ivy's parenting choices. She said she had tried to be patient, had tried to give me time to adjust, but that I wasn't adjusting. I was just becoming more present, not less. I set down the dish I was rinsing. Carefully. I picked up another one. Then Connie said something I didn't fully catch, and Ivy laughed a little and said, and this one I understood word for word because I had written it in my notebook. She doesn't understand any of this. We can say whatever we want. I stood there at the sink, and I felt the cold water running over my hands, and I thought about Robert, who had said to me once, 3 weeks before he died, "I need you to promise me you won't disappear." I asked him what he meant. He said after I'm gone. I know how you are. You'll make yourself small because you think that's what they need. Don't do that. Don't make yourself small. I had made myself small. I had been making myself small for 2 years, trimming myself down to whatever size felt least inconvenient, arriving less. Calling before coming, always, even though I'd never had to do that when Robert was alive, watching what I said, sitting in the back seat of my own relationship with my son. And I was standing at Ivy's sink, understanding every word she was saying, and I made a decision. Not to explode. I am a labor and delivery nurse. I have held screaming women through contractions that felt unsurvivable and said, firmly and calmly, you are not done. Not yet. Keep going. I know how to hold a reaction inside my body until the right moment. I kept washing dishes. Connie said something else. I caught older and alone and the word for sad. She was being sympathetic about me in the absent way you are sympathetic about a stray cat in bad weather. Fond, but not invested. Ivy agreed. She said something about how it would be better for everyone. The word she used was harmonious if things were restructured. She said she had spoken to someone at a senior living community in Avon. Not a nursing home, she said quickly. Active adult living, apartments, activities, other people my age. She said she thought it would be healthier for the whole family dynamic if I had my own community rather than borrowing theirs. She had toured it. She had a brochure. I know because she said the word for brochure and then switched briefly to English. I have the brochure upstairs. The water kept running. My hands kept moving. Sophie was napping down the hall. Connie asked, "Does Thomas know?" Ivy said, "Not yet, but he'll agree. He always does when I have a plan. He just needs to see it presented properly." I turned off the water. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. I turned around. "I'm going to make some tea," I said in English. "Connie, would you like some? I know you prefer green." Connie smiled and said yes, thank you, and Ivy looked at me with that slightly flat expression she used when I'd said something that required her to perform pleasant. I put the kettle on, and then, keeping my voice completely light, I said in Mandarin, "Ivy, did you say the senior community is in Avon? I think I know the one. I drove past it last spring. The grounds are very pretty." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Ivy's face did something I had never seen it do before. Every polished, controlled surface of it cracked at once. Connie was perfectly still. I opened the cabinet and got down 3 mugs. "My Mandarin isn't perfect," I continued in Mandarin. "Janet, my instructor at the library, she says my tones still need work, but I've been studying for 7 months, so I can follow most conversations." I paused, "including this one." Ivy said in English, "Claudette." "The tea will be just a minute," I said pleasantly. She tried again. "I want you to know that wasn't." I know what it was. I kept my voice calm. Robert's voice in my head. "You are not done. Not yet. Keep going." I know exactly what it was because I understood every word. Connie had gone very still. She said something quiet to Ivy in Mandarin. "I cut. I told you. I told you." I turned around and looked at Ivy directly. "I have never arrived here without calling. I have never contradicted your parenting in front of Sophie. I have never once asked Thomas to choose. I have driven 40 minutes each way on Sundays because my granddaughter said, 'Careful, Grandma, on the stairs today,' and that is the greatest thing that has happened to me in 2 years. That is what I have." My voice stayed even. I was proud of that. "And you have a brochure." The kettle started to whistle. I poured the tea. Ivy sat down. She looked, for the first time since I'd known her, like she didn't know what to do. Connie was looking at her daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between guilt and warning. Thomas came upstairs about 10 minutes later. He walked into a kitchen where 3 women were sitting with mugs of tea and nobody was talking, and he looked between us and said, "Everything okay?" Nobody answered for a moment. Then Connie said in careful English, "Thomas, your mother speaks Mandarin." He looked at me. 7 months, I said. I've been taking classes at the library. Thomas looked at Ivy. Ivy looked at the table. "I need someone to tell me what's going on," he said. Ivy told him. To her credit, she told him the truth. The conversation she'd had with her mother, what she'd said about me, the brochure. She said it like someone confessing rather than defending, which I noted. I'm not sure she's a bad person. I think she's a person who had been thinking thoughts she'd never had to be accountable for because she'd assumed a room in her own home was private. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know. I want you to know that. I didn't know any of it." "I know," I said, "but you also weren't asking." That landed. I watched it land. He's a good man, my son. He sat with it instead of deflecting. He turned to Ivy and said, quietly, but with a steadiness I hadn't heard from him in a long time, "We need to talk, the 3 of us. But first I need you to understand that my mother is not a problem to be restructured. She is my mother." Ivy said, "I know." "Do you?" She didn't answer. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down even though it was cold. I thought about Robert. I thought about his voice on those early mornings when he'd bring me coffee I hadn't asked for and set it on my nightstand without saying anything because he just knew. I thought about all the places we were going to go. Italy, the Amalfi Coast. We had a photograph of it pinned to the corkboard in our kitchen for 22 years. Just the 2 of us agreeing silently that someday was real. I had been waiting for someday to arrive on its own. I decided it can use some help. Thomas called that night. He said he and Ivy had talked for 2 hours. He said some things that needed to be said had been said. He said he was sorry, not in the reflexive, apologetic way he sometimes had when he was just trying to smooth things over, but in the specific way, listing things. "Sorry I didn't notice. Sorry I assumed silence meant okay. Sorry I assumed silence meant okay. Sorry I let you become invisible in a place that should feel like yours too." I told him what I told him. Don't be sorry. Just don't let it happen again. He asked why I hadn't told anyone I was learning Mandarin. I said, because it was mine, and I needed something that was just mine for a while. He was quiet. Then he said, "Are you actually good?" "Janet says my tones are improving." He laughed. It sounded like relief. Connie called me the following Wednesday, which surprised me. Her English is limited, so she used a translator app to put together her message. It said, "I should not have allowed that conversation to continue. I apologize. You are Sophie's grandmother, and you are owed more respect than I showed you by saying nothing." I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back, in Mandarin, with help from my notebook, something that said, "Thank you, and I hope we can try again." She replied with 3 words that translated to, "I would like that." In January, Connie invited me to a Lunar New Year celebration in Flushing with her community there. I took the train into the city. She met me at the station, and we walked to the restaurant together, mostly in the careful back and forth of 2 women working with a language gap, using our hands and our phones, and a lot of patience. Sophie came with Thomas and Ivy. The restaurant was loud and bright, and the food was extraordinary. At one point, Sophie climbed into my lap and said, "Grandma, what's this?" about a piece of turnip cake, and I told her in Mandarin what it was called, and she repeated it back perfectly, because she is 3 and her brain is still liquid gold. Connie looked at me across the table and smiled, not the polite smile, the real one. Ivy watched all of this. She's been different. Not transformed, not a new person, but more careful, more present. We had a conversation in February, just the two of us, while Sophie napped and Thomas was out shoveling snow. She said she had been carrying a version of me in her head that wasn't really me, an idea of an intrusive, grieving mother-in-law who needed managing. She said she thought she'd been managing the idea instead of actually knowing me. I said, I know, I could tell. She winced a little. Good. I'd like to start over, she said. We can't start over, I said, but we can go from here. That's probably better anyway. Starting over means pretending. Going from here means actually knowing what happened and choosing differently. She thought about that. Then she said, okay, from here. From here, I agreed. I'm booked to take a class at the Mandarin Language Institute in Hartford next fall, a conversation course for intermediate learners. Janet says I've outgrown the library group, which is possibly the best compliment I've ever received. I still go to the Thursday evening group because I like the people there. There's a retired school teacher who comes every week and a man in his 70s learning Mandarin because his granddaughter is engaged to someone from Shanghai, and a woman who just turned 68 and says she started because she was bored and now she's not. That's how it happens, I think. You start because of one reason and you keep going because of 20 others you didn't see coming. Robert had a saying, the only trips that don't happen are the ones you never plan. He meant it literally. He was an engineer. He liked logistics. He liked a plan. But I've been thinking about it differently lately. He was also talking about the life you decide not to have because you're waiting for the right moment that never comes on its own. I hung the Amalfi Coast photograph back up on the corkboard last spring. It had been in a drawer since he died. I'm going to Italy in June. 2 weeks, a tour group out of Hartford, other people who are done waiting. Sophie helped me pick the suitcase, very serious about the color, purple, obviously. Thomas is going to video call me every few days. Ivy put together a list of restaurants in Rome and a packing suggestion list because that is who she is, and I've decided that is actually a gift, if I choose to see it that way. I made 2 cups of coffee this morning. I drank both of them standing at the kitchen window watching the yard. If you're listening to this and someone in your life has been talking about you like you're a situation to be handled, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not a situation. You are not a problem someone else gets to solve quietly without your knowledge. The moment people think you can't understand what they're saying is the moment you find out exactly what they think. And sometimes that moment is the one that finally wakes you up. I'm 63 years old. My husband is gone, my knees are not what they were, and I am learning Mandarin on Wednesday mornings at the public library. I am going to Italy in June. My granddaughter tells me to be careful on the stairs, and I am. I am not too old. I am not a burden. I am not done. Not even close. I still think about the dish towel, the way I folded it and hung it back on the oven handle very deliberately before I turned around. That small, quiet action was the steadiest thing I'd done in 2 years. What happened in that kitchen didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of every choice Ivy made when she thought no one who mattered was listening. And it came out of every choice I made, the ones I'm proud of and the ones I'm not, because I had been making myself smaller for a long time before that Sunday afternoon. I had been trimming down my presence, my opinions, my needs to fit inside a space that kept getting narrower. I told myself it was grace. It wasn't. It was fear, dressed up as grace, and there's a difference. The thing about speaking freely in front of someone you've decided can't understand you is that it reveals exactly who you are when no one's watching. Ivy wasn't a monster. She was a woman who had never been held accountable for what she thought in private. And when you go long enough without that accountability, The private thoughts get louder. They start feeling like facts. That's what I heard in that kitchen. Not cruelty exactly, but certainty. She was certain about what I was. Certain I couldn't surprise her. That certainty was her mistake. I don't think Ivy is a bad person. I think she'd stopped being curious about me. And when you stop being curious about someone, you stop seeing them. You see a category instead. Grieving mother-in-law, well-meaning but underfoot. And you make decisions based on the category, not the person. That's not evil, but it causes real damage. It caused real damage to me. What pulled me through wasn't anger, though I felt that too. What actually saved me was the decision I'd made 7 months earlier in a library to learn something hard for no reason except that I wanted to. That decision had nothing to do with Ivy. It was about me choosing not to become someone who had already stopped. There's a kind of integrity in that, in refusing to let grief or age or other people's low expectations define the ceiling of what you're willing to try. Integrity isn't just about how you treat others. It's also about whether you keep showing up for yourself when no one's requiring you to. And then there's the matter of staying quiet at that sink, of folding the towel, of choosing my moment instead of reacting from the wound. That took something I'd spent 32 years building as a nurse. The discipline to hold a response inside your body until the right time, because the right time matters. Wisdom isn't just knowing things, it's knowing when. Robert used to say the only trips that don't happen are the ones you never plan. He meant it practically, but I've been living the deeper version of it. The trip I almost didn't take was back to myself, back to being a woman with a full life and an open mind and something still to learn. I almost let other people's idea of me become true simply by accepting it. I'm going to Italy in June. Sophie picked the suitcase. It's purple. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing.